So let's talk about the basics of animation. What is animation? The bougie answer is a sequential poses of a drawing, model, or object that are played to give the illusion of motion. In short, you make something move. That's what animation is. It's a technique, a filmmaking technique, but obviously we're applying this to games, and since technology and entertainment has evolved over centuries of culture, it's no longer just considered a filmmaking technique. It's something that stands itself. But it involves 5 main mediums. So we have traditional animation. This can be hand-drawn animation on paper. It can be painted as well. We have 2D animation, which is often digitalized. It can be hand-drawn. It can be tweened, which is where you're having like 2 different, or using a rig, and they are blending between themselves. Motion graphics, which is VFX essentially. Stop motion, using a 3D object in the real world and taking pictures every single frame. And then 3D animation, which is CGI, so things like motion capture or hand-keyed animation like you'd see in most games. So there are 12 principles for animation, and I'm going to go into all of those because crash course, so you don't need to worry about reading those just now. But the vibe to take away from it is that even though there are 12 principles, they're not 12 steps. They all tie into each other. Everything is applicable from this in games as well, because a lot of these were written back when animation was destined for film, and now that we've taken it and we're using it for different types of entertainments and stuff, it's important to know that this is still all applicable to all animation. So starting with squash and stretch and anticipation, I've also grouped these as well based on similarities. Even though they're like similar, they all stand as their own principles, but for the sake of like saving a little bit of time. Squash and stretch gives the illusion of weight, material, and impact. It can be achieved without deform through poses. So watching this bouncing ball, the squash and stretch, the squash happens when it hits the floor, and the stretch is when it's pulling upwards, pulling it away from the floor. And it basically gives the illusion that this ball is a bouncing ball. Like, it's probably made of rubber. You probably think it's like something that can be bounced like a basketball or something. And this is something that we would see in real life as well. If you watched a basketball drop in slow motion, you'll see the compression and the stretching as it pulls back out. By deforms, I mean the changing of the shape. So in 3D CGI, in animation itself, sometimes you don't have deforms to work with, and deforms is when you're like physically changing the shape of something. So if you don't have that, which is what I didn't have when I was animating fights in tight spaces and lights in tight spaces, you can achieve these through poses instead. So let's say I'm animating a jump. Instead of just having like a standard kind of like jump like that, I would have him exaggerate, pull down into a ball shape, and as he's coming up, stretching and pulling up, pull it just for like maybe a single frame, just to give that illusion that he is having a stretch. And it's a really important thing. It's really good for readability and for showing weight. And similarly, anticipation prepares for an action, but changing the length of the anticipation can highlight what the weight of the impact is going to be. So in this specific example, we have this guy pulling back for a rising kind of like uppercut. For the length that he's pulling back, you can tell it's going to be a heavy hit because of how long he's like pulling back for. If it was just a quick bop kind of thing, you'd expect it to be quite, what's it called, like a light hit, like a tap kind of vibe. But because he's really like putting everything into it, the anticipation suggests that there's more weight behind it. So follow through and overlapping and secondary action. Follow through and overlapping are looser parts of the body that act as a result of the primary action. So that is things like cloth. In this example, we have the tie kind of like swinging. You can kind of like, because he turns around is a bit annoying, but you can see at the end where his tie is kind of like swinging about. There's also a little bit in his arms as well. As he's coming up to land, you get that little bounce in the, just as he's resetting into his idle. And that's because it's follow through, it's overlapping. Having overlapping action is such a natural part of the body that it just kind of elevates the animation when you do bring it into it. You need to think about things as individuals as well as a whole piece. And secondary action is a complementary action to the primary action. So in this case, what kind of separates them is that follow through and overlapping happens on the body itself. It's something that is influenced by the body's movement. But the secondary action is something that complements it from the outside. And that helps to kind of like ground it in the real world, in whatever reality that is, in this case, the reality of fights in tight spaces. Because reality in this sense doesn't actually mean our reality. It means the reality of the video game. So it's a supporting action, and it's just an extra little piece that doesn't take away from the main action, but supports it and kind of elevates it a bit more. Also, if at any point people have any questions, feel free to ask, because I realize I'm probably going to be dumping a lot of information on you. So yeah, I'm happy to answer questions whenever. Ease in and out, timing, straight ahead, pose to pose. That sounds like a lot. We're going to get into it. So easing in and out slows the beginning and end of an animation to add realism. So in this case, we have demonstrations of motion, basically. So we have this red ball, which is in a constant state of motion. You can see that the spacing between all of the circles are like evenly spaced. There is no changing in timing in this. It's a constant state. But in the orange one, we have easing towards the end, where it's slowing down. You can tell by the overlapping there. And the third one, overlapping at the start and then coming out. So it slows the beginning and end. It adds realism to it as well, because things don't naturally come to a halt immediately. Things slow down, things need time to recover. So having easing in and out just makes your animation better. Timing reflects a space between frames. So in this case, if we're looking at the red ball, where it's just a constant movement, it's quite slow, but the blue ball has wider gaps in between the frames of it, and that indicates that it moves quicker. It appears it's moving quicker, even though at the end of the animation it does finish. And that's because it is, because the less frames you have between key poses, the quicker the animation is. Straight ahead is a practice of animation. It is a way of basically animating where you animate every single frame in chronological order from start to finish. So in this case, for this ball, if we were going to be animating the blue ball, we would go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we would animate every single one until we reach like frame 100 or however many frames are in it. While on the other hand, pose to pose is the practice of animating key poses and then filling in the frames afterwards. So the key poses in this case are the most notable things where you don't have like an in-between, you don't need the in-between. So key pose for this ball would be up here, right at the bottom when it first hits the ground. As it comes back up there, back down again, up a little bit, and down again. And those are the key poses. Afterwards, you would go back in and animate around it. For me, I work in pose to pose because with use of like CGI, we have this thing called interpolation, which basically, if you put a key pose down on one frame and on a fifth frame, CGI will just interpolate those frames for you. It will generate the blending between those, and then you can go back in and add things on top of it. You can layer animations and values so that you can just kind of like tweak instead of having to build it entirely. Things like stop motion and traditional 2D animation, you do kind of have to go back in and manually add those frames yourself, but CGI is a lot more lax in that sense. So exaggeration and solid drawing. Exaggeration amplifies the movement to appeal more to that action. So in this case, it's doing something really dramatic that is quite unrealistic, but that's the whole point of animation, is to push the boundaries of realism. So it makes everything expressive. Obviously, this guy is doing a backwards kick, like a backflip kick, and he hangs in the air. He's got all these like really cool shapes going on. But could you do that in reality? Absolutely not. If anybody can, that would be great. But it just makes it more appealing, more kind of like dramatic. While on the other end of it, solid drawing is expressing the importance of consistent volume and proportions in 2D art specifically. But we can apply this to 3D art and 3D animations by having a solid understanding of three-dimensional movement, animation quality and consistency, and also understanding how the human body works and how we can push it in a way that still kind of grounds it. And these two I put together because they're opposites of each other, essentially. Solid drawing talks about realism, exaggeration talks about pushing boundaries, and I think having a balance of both of them can really elevate your animation and just make it so much better. It's also really important that even though you can be going for a really anime style of any kind of like animation, that all of it still has to have some level of grounding in it. But likewise, there's no point in having realistic animations unless you're really trying to push for realism, and if it's meant to be photorealistic or something. Because even in things like Call of Duty or something, they're when they're doing like the reloads in the first-person view and stuff, all of those feel realistic. They feel real, but they're not. If you watch how somebody actually loads a weapon, it's very different to how Call of Duty does it, and that's just because they're pushing it, they're making it more dramatic, and therefore more appealing to everybody. It feels crunchy, it feels nice. So having a balance of both, chef's kiss. And then finally, staging arcs and appeal. So Staging refers to the layout in camera. When we apply this to games, because in this sense, they're talking about film, they're talking about composition, the layout, negative shapes, and all that kind of stuff. In terms of games, we're thinking of the audience's point of view. So like game design, whether that's a third-person view or first-person view. In my case, it's isometric view, so fights in tight spaces and lights in tight spaces are all isometric, and you can see from all 4 kind of angles. So I predominantly animate in those 4 angles, which is one of the examples I've brought on here. And what I take away from staging in this sense is to look at negative shapes and see how readable everything is as part of the audience's view. So that's why everything is in a flat color here, because I use the negative shape around it to the silhouette as well to make sure that the audience knows what's happening when I'm animating my attack. Arcs are the best motion path in order for the animation to flow. Nothing in the human body moves like a straight line. Everything has some kind of bounce to it. Everything has some kind of like a figure of 8 or something. And everything has an arc. When you're walking, your arms are like coming up and down in like a normal way, even if you're walking quickly, even if it's a little bit jagged. And in this case, you can kind of see like this really bad quality red line, but it's following the sword around and back again. And you can see where there's like little curves over it and stuff because everything is meant to follow an arc. Anything that has like kind of a straight line, you might want to like look into. There's only some cases, I think, where straight lines are kind of like required, and that's if there's like worldly influence. So if I'm holding something and that thing is being pulled along, that makes sense. But in most cases, if you are driving the human body, then it's going to be following arcs. And all of that, all of the 12 principles, ties into an appealing animation. Appealing animation is obviously, that is one of the focal points of animating, is to make something that looks good, that looks pretty, and that the audience finds engaging. So going back over all the other animations, making sure that like the work that you do is kind of engaging to the audience and interesting, that there's something just a little bit poppy, a bit crunchy about it, all ties in, and that's why it's one of the 12 principles rather than an overview of the 12 principles. So 2D versus 3D. 2D animation in video games, they are normally implemented with sprite sheets or animated in engine and rigged. I didn't realize actually for a while that I could be animated in engine until I was doing some research about it, so I can't really talk about that, but I have had a little bit experience of sprite sheets and just kind of like basically going through, drawing your animations or animating your animation and then taking every single frame and applying it into basically like a texture sheet and that you put into whatever software you're using, Unreal, Unity, and kind of like going from there. Rigged, it sounds really vague, but that's basically where you have a rigged 2D character. I couldn't really find a lot of research on that either, but I'm predominantly a 3D animator. So I'm going to be talking about 3D a lot. So 3D animation uses hand-keyed animation or motion capture. It's also the most common type of animation in video games. So that is like, I think if you go on the Steam store, you're going to see a lot of 3D, especially in AAA games, all that kind of stuff. Hand-keyed animation. So hand-keyed is where you are actively animating every single frame yourself. It is like stylized, dynamic. You can push everything a lot more. But it is also time-consuming because at the end of the day, someone is having to make every single pose, make every decision on the movement. While motion capture is realistic, mainly humanoid or like kind of more grounding in the real world. So if you want to animate monsters or anything, you'd kind of struggle a little bit more with that. But it does also have reduced time costs. So for any kind of like projects where you have a big like a big budget and a little less time, motion capture tends to be the way to go, especially if there's a lot of workload too. I normally animate in hand-keyed. I've done like a little bit of experience in motion capture, and I do also think that animators working with motion capture can make something really, really good and something that is a little bit more extra than just realism, but that tends to be what motion capture is used for. So let's talk about game versus film, the differences. So film animation and is trying to immerse the audience as an observer. And obviously, like in every kind of like entertainment, we're trying to immerse the audience, right? We're trying to bring them into whatever we're like giving them. But in this case, there's a difference between game and film. So film animation is, again, immersing the audience as an observer. You're giving them a story, you're giving them characters to love and all that kind of stuff. While game animation serves audience intentions. You're giving, so they're immersing the people as a player, as a part of the world, as a character who has a driving force in what they're doing. Even if you're giving them a set story, a very linear story, having the option to walk around, to pick up objects, to hit things, giving the player a chance to decide things, is serving audience intentions. And because of that, I classify game animation as functional and film animation as storytelling. And that's not to say that neither one of the other is functional storytelling or anything like that. I just think game animation as a whole serves to function for the player, while film is more kind of like handing over and being like, you know, here's what I have, rather than giving players the option. Game animation, we animate from all angles as well, because in film, you were given a camera shot, right? You only really need to animate to that shot, so that means that you can abuse the rig as much as you want, you can abuse the scene as much as you want to make sure that you are achieving the composition, the style, the motion that you want. In video games, this is much less possible because the audience can see the animation from any side, especially if you're thinking like kind of, what's it called? The third POV kind of thing, where you're looking over the shoulder of your character, but you can see them turning around and like existing in the real world and stuff. So it's important to remember that when you're animating for games, that you're animating for every single part of it, like checking out all of the different angles, all of the ways that a player might want to break your animations. Timing is also approached differently. So the way that I interpret it, because timing in general is super important to animators, in film, you have a lot more time to express kind of like nuances and like holding people in suspense. But when it comes to game animation, and I'm not talking about cinematics, by the way, I'm like just purely talking about game animation, we're wanting quick and snappy action, we're wanting dynamic movement, we're wanting things to not be so nuanced. You can add a lot of character and you can add a lot of layering on top of it, but the timing in video games, you need to think about how much you're making the player wait rather than making an audience member wait in the film. If you're making audience wait in a film, you're probably doing the right thing, but if you're making them wait in a game, it's just a little bit, like pushing it a little bit, and it's not quite received the same. So that's why I approach timing differently when it comes to the two. Game animation is also broken up by movements and attacks. So it's played in a controlled sequence when you press like mouse click and you shoot something. You like press E, you hit something or whatever. While in film, everything is basically a continuous take in one shot. Obviously, all those shots are like separated and split and put into like an editing software and brought all together. But when it comes to game animation, every single thing is broken up and split into its own thing so that you can apply that to the player and give them, again, their intention, allow them to explore whatever they want, basically. So function and flavor, what makes good animation? A solid understanding of practices and style, specifically like referring back to the 12 principles, making sure that you understand how animation is supposed to kind of like work, making sure that you can achieve grounded like animation, and then applying exaggeration and applying all of the dynamic things on top of it will just elevate everything and make your animations stand out, but like outside of every other kind of like projects and stuff. And style, speaking like specifically about working with art departments and stuff, if you have a game that is kind of like based in reality and stuff, you might want to go for a more realistic animation style. You don't want to have like a bunch of anime stuff. But if you've got cartoony characters, there's no point in having realism as your kind of like animation style when you can really push it and you can explore all those like creative freedoms. Readable and interesting player animation. So readable is one of the biggest and most important things. There was a really good article I read recently about the creative differences a lead animator did when animating for his game about holding a sword. And he had this character holding a sword over him, but when the character was being animated, you couldn't really see the sword outside of his silhouette. So he opted for the dog, because it was a dog, obviously, dragging a sword instead. And that kind of like, that one decision of moving something in front of him to out there suddenly made the silhouette so much more engaging and readable and easy for the audience. And that's one of the main things to take away from game animation, is making something as readable as possible, because the players don't know what's going to happen until it happens, and you want it for them to be able to click onto it really easy. You don't want them to come away from it and be like, what did I just do there? And player animation should also feel rewarding as well. We don't want just like regular basic hits. You want to give them something like crunchy, something to chew on kind of vibe, because the animation that a player, like if a player puts in like a combo move or something like that, you want to reward them for having that intuition. You want them to feel like they've got a place in the world, that all of their animations are kind of like, represented, I guess, of the power that they hold as a character in this world. And then also flow from one animation to the next as well is one of the most important technical things, I think, to take away from this too, is giving focus to blending actions into idles and likewise idles into actions. It's something that I focus on a lot when it comes to animating in fights and tight spaces and lights and tight spaces, because when you don't have a good blend between the two, the stop-startiness looks so janky. And we already talked about arcs and how we want things to flow into each other really nicely, but having something stop immediately and then snap back into an idle is really noticeable, and something that separates, I think, a lot of games from the poorer animated ones is the difference between blending, basically, from animations into idles. Clear telegraphing as well. Does anybody know what telegraphing means? Or, cool, demonstrate to the rest of us, please.
I'm holding a massive sword.
Yeah.
And it's an enemy partner.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay, perfect, thank you. So telegraphing in that case is having that moment of the big swing coming up. So say there's an enemy standing in front of you. Has anybody played Dark Souls? Okay, thank you. Yes, everybody should play Dark Souls, it's great, and also terrifying at the same time. But enemies have a telegraphing part of it. Telegraphing is basically where the enemy is going to convey to you, I'm gonna like hit you right now, you're dead. And if you don't move, if you don't act in this one instance, in this one frame of movement, then you're gone. And that's one of the most important things for enemy animation specifically, because the players know what they're doing, right? They know that they're gonna hit the guy, they're gonna hopefully get like a cool combo or something like that. And that's why player animation is rewarding. But for enemies, oh, we're going back, that's fun. For enemy animation, it should feel like an explanation. It should feel like something that you know what's going to happen. They're like, okay, something's going to happen here. And that's where it comes from, the big hit, the big kind of like movement coming over. And it can be anything else. It can also be things like VFX where the texture changes on the character, or something emerges from it. If anybody's played Monster Hunter Wilds, there is this white wraith, which is one of the monsters. Beautiful for telegraphing. Like it brings out these like massive spiny kind of like taily things. I haven't played Monster Hunter Wilds, but I've watched it purely just for the animation because it's gorgeous. And it's a really, really good example of telegraphing in monsters and in enemies. So let's talk tech overview. I have a very pretty rig on the side there. I just want to give you guys a reminder that I'm based in 3ds Max and Unity, so I'm trying not to take away specific tech points, and I just want to give you guys an overview of what the vibe is on tech. So we utilize a base rig, an avatar, to assign animations to. So that means that we have one rig, which is this guy here, who we put into our Unity project, and any animations that we do export or bring into the project, we use this skeleton for. In the rig, we have a few main things. So the root, which dictates movement and collisions. And this is invisible to the audience. This isn't something that like us as animators really concerned with. All we need to make sure is that this root, which is this tiny cross here, is following the character. And that basically means that when he's passing over someone, if there's a ragdoll in the way, the ragdoll will move and respond to the collisions of the guy. The pelvis is the top of the hierarchy, even though technically the root would be in a lot of cases, but because the root was invisible to the actual the audience, the players, the pelvis is the top. And it dictates the visual movement, the hierarchy of it as well. So if I have a guy running in the scene, if I took his pelvis and literally twisted it, in most cases, the entire animation would flip, or the entire bone structure would flip. So the pelvis is important for basically driving all of the motion. IK and FK. Does anybody know what IK and FK means? Cool, nice. I'm going to describe for the rest of you guys. It's inverse kinematics and forward kinematics. So that is basically, I'm going to put this down, how our bones or limbs function. So forward kinematics is like how my arm is right now, where we have, if I want to move my hand from over here to over here, I would move my upper arm, then I would move my elbow, then I would move my hand. And it's basically animating downwards. You can animate back up as well and stuff, but it's following an arc. Whereas IK, inverse kinematics, is like if you have a point, like a little helpery kind of thing. Let's say that the mouse is the helper, and I take that mouse and I move it anywhere, and my arm follows. This might seem like the nicest way of animating, but if you're not holding something and if your character isn't placing hands on the ground, feet on the ground or anything like that, you almost always want to animate in forward kinematics. For legs, it's almost always inverse kinematics because it's driven by the floor, by the foot position and stuff. And if you were to move everything into forward kinematics, that means that everything will spin from the pelvis, and that means you can't really animate properly. Sockets as well. So in this example, we have a socket here and here. And those are the ability to basically hold weapons in game. So we can assign weapons to them, any kind of weapon. And it also means we can animate weapons in our universal, like our, what's called 3ds Max, our files, basically. So in the previous example where I showed you the spinning sword, there's a part of that where the sword does leave his hand and spins around for a second and like goes back into his hand. And I'm able to do that because we have sockets for animating swords. And it just means that like adding that little extra bone gives you a lot more freedom to work with when it comes to anything that involves weapons. Weapons and objects as well. It doesn't have to exclusively be weapons. We also export all of our animations as FBX files into Unity as well, separately from the rig itself. So like we're pulling the animations from the rig, but not pulling the entire mesh, the bones and all that with it. And then we implement the animation using timelines, which is one of the ways you can implement animation into video games. It's our preferred version in Fights in Tight Spaces and Knights in Tight Spaces because those games function as like a controlled sequence rather than something that needs to be responsive immediately to the character, because you play cards and those cards reflect the animations and the movement you do. So there's a lot more time, and it's just a bit of a better system for us personally. So after that, my pipeline for tile-based animation. I'm going to spare the details of actual animation, like how I animate everything, but in terms of the technical side, I use a lot of guides for these small spaces because they're tight spaces. So I have a safety box, which means that if this guy is clipping through any of these walls, that means he's in the other square. And technically, that's fine. But visually, it means he might be clipping through walls. It might mean that he's going to accidentally hit another enemy when the enemy in front of him is someone I was targeting originally. And it's just important keeping those in mind so that when you place those animations in the environment, in the game, in the scene, that it's not interrupting anything or kind of like feeling messy, because clipping does look messy from a professional standpoint. I also have a grid as well so that I can, so I know where the movement needs to go. If he does need to move forward, if there is an enemy in front of him, I know that he's going to be standing there or to the left or something. And then I also animate using a quad view to check my silhouettes. So I would have my normal screen for animation and this on my other screen. And that is basically like where I showed you my previous animations, but you can see he's just kind of standing there in all of the angles. And those are the angles that are represented in our game as well. So afterwards, I export the animation with baked keys in an FBX. And this is, again, like separate from the actual rig itself, but taking those values from the bones and pulling them into Unity. We also follow specific naming conventions, but I'm going to talk about that after a picture pops up there. Then we assign the animations their correct avatar, which is essentially just the rig anyway. It's the universal rig that we bring into Unity and just applying things on top of it. And then the coders can switch between the models there if they wanted to. Because in Knights in Tight Spaces, we use a humanoid system, which means that if I export one animation, it can be applied to every single model, every single character. And we have about like 20 plus characters in Knights in Tight Spaces. So just basically putting a universal one on means the coders can switch between whatever they want to do. Then we set up timelines ready for coders, sound, and VFX. So the timeline looks like this, and also adding reaction markers too. So that reaction markers are things like blocks and get hits, and we're in charge of that as animators so that we can basically line up when the response needs to be triggered for the enemy in front. So yeah, that would be this. This is like sound effects and VFX and stuff too. Going back to naming conventions really quick, I don't know if everybody can see, but I'm just going to read it out anyway. So we follow a specific type or a structure of naming conventions. And naming conventions and organization is super important in your projects, by the way. The more you're on top of it, the easier it is for everyone. So in this case, we have Wraith, at, swipe attack, F1, MO. So going through all of those. Wraith at means that that is the specific rig that it requires. This animation is for a unique enemy type. So that means it doesn't follow the conventions of our previous universal rig. It uses a completely like unique rig to itself. And that's why we have Wraith at. In other cases, we would use character default, and that is our default rig. We have swipe attack, and that tells the coders and anybody else who looks at the animation just in Unity without like actually visually seeing the animation itself, it's a swipe attack. It's going to have something on there that's damaging. We have F1 and M0, and those are extra little pieces of information for coders, where F1 indicates the direction of the attack or the tile of the attack. So F is forward, L would be L, or left would be L even, and likewise all the way around. The number indicates what tile it's on, so F1 means right in front, but F2 would be 2 tiles in front, which means they would have to walk up, then hit, then come back. And whether or not they come back or stay there depends on M, which is movement, and M0 means there is 0 movement, so it just remains in its spot. But if it was to move forwards 1 to get to that F2 tile, it would do MF1, and it would stay there at the end of the tile. And it's basically just a little extra way of telling the coders, here's all the functions of the animation, so you don't need to look at it, and we don't need to have like a massive description of what's going on. So, extras and improvements to your animation. We were just talking about sound and VFX, but these can massively elevate animations when they're done right. And having an animation where it's just like swinging your sword around, it could be the coolest animation in the world, and it will visually look really impressive. But the actual sound and VFX behind it is something that just adds a little bit extra flavor. It adds a little bit more of like a spice kind of thing to it. And it really does improve the crunchiness, the quality of the animation. It makes it feel like it hits as well. So having a good relationship with your sound and VFX team is great, because then they're just like, yeah, Jess, we'll do whatever you want. I'm like, cool, thank you. And it means that everything that I make is so much better because of the work that they put into it. So bringing those into your animations would be really beneficial. Animation style. So we've already talked a little bit about like animation style and realism and like kind of like anime style and stuff. But just working alongside your art department, it's a collaborative experience at the end of the day. So making sure that you're all kind of like working together, you're all unified in your idea, and actually just pushing the boundaries of animation a little bit to make sure that the style is fun, readable, engaging, and hitting the 12 principles as well. Push and exaggerate animation, literally just what I said. Don't ground everything in realism unless it's required. And that's going back again to the Call of Duty stuff where they present to us a realistic game, but actually a lot of the animation or a lot of the movement isn't realistic because they add a little bit extra. They make it a little bit more crunchy. And doing things like that is something that makes the animation way, way more appealing, way more engaging for a player, and just kind of more fun to play. People will play your game just to look at the animations. And then think ahead. These are things I've had to ask myself over the last 6 years of animating, and things that I wish I asked myself at the start. So do you have character interactions? If you have character interactions, how do you think they're going to operate in game? How are you going to make sure that they collide, that they're existing next to each other, that they're synced up with one another, trying to make sure that you kind of like anticipate any problems that could be surrounding that is really important. Does your animation need to be placed on multiple rigs? So this was something that we had to talk about at the start of Knights and Tight Spaces, because in Fights and Tight Spaces, all of those rigs were unique. But coming into Knights, we wanted a lot more characters, we wanted a lot more animations, so it meant we had to go onto multiple rigs. And if you have multiple rigs, are those rigs compatible with the animations? So there's been instances in Knights and Tight Spaces where we had to reassess rigs and compatibility because we had issues between humanoid and skeleton animations, and bones were popping where they shouldn't have been popping. So it was important questions for us to ask and come back and like look at. But that's more of a technical side of animating. How to be best mates with your animators. For the people who aren't animators and for the people who want to be animators, take notes of these, because then hopefully they'll do things for you. So work closely with your animators on game design, something that I've really enjoyed doing lately, especially in Nights and Tight Spaces and the projects we're working on right now, is working with game design to make sure that we're giving them really crunchy and nice animations, fun stuff to kind of like work with, but also still achieving what they wanted as like a visual. And having a close relationship with game design, with coders as well, making sure that the functionality of the move itself fits with your animation and also just kind of feels readable is super important. So definitely bring in your animators on that. Don't change your timings of animations in engine. This is something that can be done. Don't do it. Just because when you change the animation timings in engine, it's basically universally changing all of them. It's making them slightly faster. Maybe you're like, oh, well, I've animated everything a little bit slowly, so I want to increase the speed of it all. Just go back and go into the actual file itself and do a batch export or something, set up a system to make it easier. Just because when you change the timings of animations in-game, coming back and doing any kind of edits on top of that, which frequently there are edits on animations, makes it so much harder to retime things or to figure out where things are, how things are looking. Because in most cases, you'll go back, you'll re-export them, and they'll be way quicker than they're supposed to be, or they don't feel like they're sitting quite right. And as an animator, not knowing if the timings of animations have changed in game and sitting there going, am I like insane? Am I crazy right now? Is not great, not fun. So just having open communication with if the timings do need to change, leave that to the animator and let them sort it out. Finalizing rigs as closely as possible before animating. So I say as closely as possible because as a project evolves, so does everything that you need, right? Like you don't know what you're going to need at the end. You can try and anticipate and ask yourself as many questions as you can, and that's still a really good thing to do. But at the end of the day, the projects do change. So trying to get your rigs as close to the finish line as possible is ideal, but they will kind of, they're going to evolve. So having a placement rig is valid, and that means that if you haven't finished the actual character itself, so long as the bones don't physically change, the naming of the bones don't change, then in most cases it's perfectly fine and you can add everything on top of it. But yeah, so a placement rig is perfectly fine. We did the same in Nights and Tight Spaces where we wanted to get like on animation straight away, but we didn't have a model to work with. So we just used our default rig until like actual models and characters got brought in. And yeah, I've already talked about how they change and evolve because the project will require more stuff. Give them creative freedom as well. There's a lot of restrictions that can come from animating, thinking about how things need to hit something, the spacing. In terms of my work, like I'm animating in tight spaces, which means I get in fights and tight spaces, we were working in a 1 meter squared grid, which meant that all of my animations basically was in a circle of me, which is difficult to do when you're kicking someone. But having the creative freedom to explore how I'm going to do that and not be told, okay, well, this isn't working, or like, oh, I want it to look exactly like this, was really useful and actually really freeing to be able to kind of come up to those challenges and meet those challenges and go beyond them as well, because Fights and Tight Spaces, I think, is a good looking game. Same with Nights and Tight Spaces too. So I think something that I value a lot is the kind of like, the collaboration with art departments and everybody else, but also being given my own independence and freedom to work on the animations as I see fit. The more personality, the better. I love animating character animation. I think a lot of animators do tend to lean in towards character animation. And the more personality you have in your characters, in your lore, in your world, the more we can bring into that, and more we can lean into that and add all these little like kind of nuances, subtle movements that kind of like highlight their characters a little bit more and just give like a little bit extra oomph. And I think it elevates the game. I think it elevates the characters, and I think the players find it way more engaging when you're given a character and you're given someone with a lot of personality. And then also involve them in character design to avoid issues with like meshes and design itself. Something that I really value Ground Shatter for is that we're all very open and collaborative when it comes to talking about these things. So with game design, with character design. And there are things that your animators will pick up that you as a game designer, you as an artist wouldn't pick up. So there was specifically an instance where we had this guy who had a pauldron over his left shoulder. And I looked at that and I went, I don't think that's going to work, even though the guy looked super cool. But the reason behind it was because I knew that there was an idol in game or a weapon set in game, which was a bow where he's holding his bow like this. And as a ranger, having something completely blocking your vision, probably not the vibe, not really something that's going to function well or look good. especially if it's hiding the entire face. So it was little things like that, and just suggesting kind of different ways to make sure that the animation is going to function in the game with the characters, making sure that they don't look silly with pauldrons in their faces when they're an archer.